The scent of salt and honeysuckle always brought me back. Charleston, South Carolina, was a city built on quiet charm and deep-seated history, and for 38 years, it had been my sanctuary. My name is Rhiannon Hayes, and I lived a life defined by meticulous routines. My mornings began with a precisely brewed cup of single-origin coffee, followed by an hour in my meticulously organized home office, where I managed a small, bespoke interior design firm. Every fabric swatch was labeled, every client file digitally indexed. I found comfort in order, a reflection of a deeply principled nature that believed things should work as they were designed to. Life, I thought, should unfold with a predictable grace. Like the tides in the harbor, my days were usually a pleasant hum of consultations, design sketches, and the quiet satisfaction of bringing beauty into people's lives. My evenings, often spent with a good book or a rare, perfectly aged bottle of wine, were my own. I wasn't a recluse, but I cherished my solitude, especially after my Aunt Clara Hayes moved in with me 5 years prior. Clara was my mother's elder sister, a woman who possessed a warmth that could melt glaciers and a laugh that echoed with decades of joy. She was also, in her twilight years, increasingly frail, her heart a fragile, beloved instrument that required constant care. She was my anchor, my connection to a past filled with unconditional love, and her presence filled the quiet corners of my large, old house with a comforting, gentle light. The world outside my meticulously ordered bubble often felt chaotic, but I had learned to navigate it, to find my own quiet corner within its sprawling noise. I believed in fairness, in systems working as they should, in the simple premise that if you played by the rules, you were entitled to what you earned. It was a naive belief, perhaps, one that would soon shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The call came on a Tuesday, a day I had marked in my planner for fabric selections for a client's living room. Aunt Clara was visiting her childhood friend, Eleanor, in Asheville, North Carolina. They had planned a week of quiet reminiscences, porch swings, and warm tea. Clara was supposed to return by train, a mode of transport she preferred, citing its nostalgic charm and gentle sway. She hated flying. We had booked her a first-class ticket, specifically requesting an accessible seat with ample space for her medical oxygen tank and a small, foldable mobility scooter. It was a considerable expense, but Clara's comfort and safety were paramount. I had even called the train line, Atlantic Rail Transit, directly multiple times to confirm the specific requirements and the allocated space. They had assured me each time, with a confident, almost dismissive tone, that everything was in order. A guaranteed reserved space, Miss Hayes, for medical necessity, of course. Their words still echoed in my mind, a hollow mockery. That Tuesday, however, was not about fabric swatches. It was about a frantic call from Eleanor, her voice thin and trembling. Rhiannon, Clara's had an episode. She needs to get back to Charleston immediately. The hospital here, they're not equipped for long-term cardiac care. Needs her specialists. My blood ran cold. An episode. Clara alone, miles away. I scrambled, my meticulous nature giving way to a frantic panic. I immediately called Atlantic Rail Transit. Her train was due to depart in less than an hour. I explained the situation, the urgency, the need for her reserved medical space to be available. The customer service representative, a young man with a monotone voice, assured me again that her space was confirmed. "No issues, ma'am. She'll be fine." Elena rushed Clara to the Asheville train station. What unfolded there, relayed to me in choked sobs by Elena later, was a nightmare stitched from indifference and entitlement. The train, the Palmetto Express, was already running an hour behind schedule, a common occurrence I'd later learn, though unheard of for an organization that prided itself on punctuality. The platform was a swirling vortex of disgruntled passengers, their frustration a palpable hum in the humid air. Clara, frail and struggling for breath even with her oxygen, arrived at her designated first-class carriage. Her reserved space, clearly marked with a sign, was occupied, not by another passenger, but by a mountain of luggage. Oversized suitcases, duffel bags, even a set of golf clubs, all belonging to a boisterous group of young men who had apparently decided the designated medical space was perfect for their overflow. Elena, desperate, pleaded with them. "Please, my friend is very ill. This space is reserved for her medical equipment." The young men, dismissive and arrogant, merely shrugged. "Find another spot, lady. We were here first. This train's packed." Their laughter, Elena recounted, was like a physical blow. A conductor arrived, drawn by Elena's escalating distress. He looked at the luggage, then at Clara, then back at the young men. He mumbled something about policy and discretion. He asked them weakly to move their bags. They refused. "I have no power to move them," the conductor stated, echoing the very words I would later hear on the Reddit post that mirrored my experience. "Only the police can, and they won't turn up just to move someone's luggage." My aunt, her face ashen, her breathing labored, stood there, denied the very space that was meant to be her lifeline. There were no other first-class seats available, let alone space for her equipment. The regular carriages were standing room only. With the train already delayed, a vital window of time for her urgent cardiac care was rapidly closing. Elena, desperate, tried to call for an ambulance from the station, but the conductor, worried about further delays, pressured them. "You need to get on now if you want to leave. We're already running late." Clara, too weak to argue, too principled to cause a scene, reluctantly boarded the packed, stifling coach, her oxygen tank awkwardly balanced, her scooter left behind on the platform. Every minute of that agonizing journey, every lurch and sway of the train, was a minute stolen from her dwindling reserves. By the time the train finally limped into Charleston, 3 hours late, the damage was irreversible. I met her at the platform, my heart leaping with a mix of relief and dread when I saw her. Her eyes, usually sparkling with life, were dull and distant. Her lips were blue. We rushed her to the hospital, but it was too late. The doctors, their faces grim, explained that the prolonged exertion, the stress, the delay in receiving critical care had taken their toll. Aunt Clara passed away that night. My grief was a tsunami, washing over me with a force I hadn't known possible. But beneath the profound sorrow, a cold, hard ember began to glow. It wasn't just sadness, it was a simmering, quiet rage. Rage not at the young men, not primarily, for they were merely symptoms of a larger sickness. My fury was directed at Atlantic Rail Transit, at their policies, their lack of accountability, their hollow assurances, their conductors who had no power, their system that prioritized schedule adherence over human life, their indifference that allowed a vulnerable woman to be denied critical medical transport in a space she had paid for and was guaranteed. It was a fundamental breach of trust, a betrayal of the very principles I held dear. I wrote letters, hundreds of them, to the CEO, to the board of directors, to regulatory bodies, to local and national newspapers. I meticulously documented every call, every conversation, every promise made and broken. I compiled Aliner's testimony, the train schedules, the hospital's medical reports. My principled nature demanded justice. My meticulousness ensured I had an ironclad case. But I was met with silence, with generic, impersonal replies, with legalistic jargon that deflected blame and offered no solace, no apology, no accountability. Our deepest sympathies, but such incidents are rare. We operate within all regulatory guidelines. The very words were a slap in the face. They didn't care. Aunt Clara was just a statistic, a regrettable incident, a minor inconvenience in their profit margins. The fire in my belly grew hotter, consuming my grief, refining it into something sharper, colder. This wasn't just about Clara anymore. It was about every unseen victim of corporate indifference, every person failed by a system that placed convenience and profit above dignity and safety. My meticulously organized life shifted. The design business became a background hum, something I did on autopilot. My focus narrowed, sharpened, like a scalpel. I realized that traditional paths to justice were blocked. The system itself was the enemy, protected by layers of bureaucracy and legal loopholes. I had to become the systemic avenger. It was a daunting, overwhelming thought, but as I sat in Clara's empty, quiet room, the lingering scent of her lavender sachet, a cruel reminder of what was lost, I knew with absolute certainty that I would not rest until I found a way to make them pay. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. The question wasn't if, but how. And I, Rhiannon Hayes, principled, meticulous, and soon to be resourceful in ways they couldn't imagine, was determined to find out. Act 2. Struggle, the desperation and descent into darkness. The initial weeks after Clara's death blurred into a haze of sorrow and indignant rage. I tried to maintain my outward composure, continued to meet clients, to sketch designs, but my mind was a churning storm. The legal avenues proved to be dead ends, just as I had anticipated. My initial consultation with a prominent Charleston attorney, a man known for his tenacious pursuit of justice, ended with a sympathetic shake of his head. Ms. Hayes, the liability here is incredibly complex. Proving direct causation between the luggage and your aunt's passing, especially given her pre-existing condition, will be an uphill battle. And the cost, it would be astronomical. Atlantic Rail Transit has an army of lawyers. They'll bury you in paperwork. His words, intended as a warning, only hardened my resolve. If the official channels were rigged, I would simply have to carve my own. My meticulous nature, once applied to fabric swatches and color palettes, now turned with chilling precision to the dissection of Atlantic rail transit. I subscribed to industry journals, regulatory reports, and obscure transportation safety forums. I devoured annual reports, quarterly earnings calls, and investor presentations. I learned about the internal structure of the company, its key players, its operational weaknesses, its financial vulnerabilities. I was no longer an interior designer. I was a one-woman intelligence agency, operating out of my quiet home office. My days began earlier, ending far later. Sleep became a luxury, a brief respite from the relentless pursuit of information. I learned about their booking algorithms, their staff training manuals, their emergency protocols, or lack thereof. I discovered that the no power to move him excuse was a deliberate corporate policy designed to avoid confrontational situations that might lead to delays, or, heaven forbid, negative public relations. It was safer, cheaper, to let a passenger be inconvenienced, even medically compromised, than to risk a scene that might ripple through their carefully curated image. My principled core seethed. This wasn't negligence. It was systemic callousness. My resourcefulness, a trait I'd previously applied to finding antique furniture or unique textiles, now manifested in unexpected ways. I taught myself basic coding, enough to scrape public data, to analyze patterns in train delays, passenger complaints, and reported incidents. I learned how to use open-source intelligence tools to track public records of Atlantic Rail Transit's fines, settlements, and safety violations. The deeper I dug, the more insidious the rot appeared. There were countless stories, hushed and dismissed, of similar incidents, missed medical appointments, crucial business meetings ruined, vulnerable passengers left stranded or without proper accommodation. Clara wasn't an anomaly. She was one of many, just one of the ones who didn't survive my social life, never expansive, dwindled to nothing. Friends called, concerned by my increasing reclusiveness, but I found I had little to say. How could I explain that I was consumed by a quiet war against a faceless corporation, a battle fought in the silent hum of my computer and the flickering glow of my monitors? My beloved home, once a haven, began to feel like a fortress. Dust motes danced in sunbeams where there used to be laughter. My design firm, once a source of pride, became a necessary evil, providing the funds for my escalating research and the occasional specialist consultation with someone who might shed light on a particular legal or operational nuance. There were moments, stretches of agonizing despair, when I wanted to give up. Weeks would pass without a breakthrough, just endless data, dead ends, and the gnawing feeling that I was sinking deeper into an abyss of my own making. The loneliness was profound, a physical ache in my chest. I missed Clara's gentle presence, her unwavering optimism, her simple belief in the good in people. How could I, Rhiannon Hayes, the meticulous, principled woman who designed beautiful homes, become this obsessed, solitary figure haunted by a ghost? Was I losing myself in this quest for vengeance? One particularly dark night, after staring at spreadsheets filled with years of unaddressed safety recommendations, a wave of nausea swept over me. The sheer scale of their indifference, the magnitude of the system's failure, felt insurmountable. I had poured thousands of hours and nearly half of my savings into this crusade. My eyes ached, my head throbbed. I slumped forward, my face pressing against the cool glass of my desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating the faint sheen of tears. This was rock bottom. The raw, visceral pain of grief mixed with the crushing weight of futility. I was just one person. How could I possibly dismantle an institution? But then, as always, a memory surfaced. Not of Clara's suffering, though that was always present, but of her resilience, of her quiet dignity even in the face of adversity, of the small, determined smile she wore even as her body failed her. She wouldn't have given up. And then, a flicker of an idea, sparked by a random article I'd stumbled upon, a deep dive into an obscure regulatory loophole involving passenger manifest data and public transparency laws for publicly traded companies. It wasn't about proving direct causation of Clara's death anymore. It was about exposing the pattern, the institutional negligence, the systemic disregard for passenger well-being that led to incidents like Clara's. It wasn't about a single incident. It was about the culture that bred them, my resolve, tempered by the long, dark nights of despair, now hardened into something unbreakable. I wasn't going to sue them. I was going to expose them in a way that couldn't be ignored, in a way that hit them where it truly hurt. Their reputation, their stock price, their very right to operate without genuine accountability. My role as the systemic avenger solidified. I wouldn't seek revenge against an individual, but against the very framework that enabled such indifference. I would become the personification of their forgotten victims. The planning became a twisted art form. My meticulous nature thrived on the complexity. My resourcefulness found joy in uncovering hidden connections. And my principled core ensured every step was aimed at true justice, not mere destruction. The idea was to create a cascade, a domino effect that would force Atlantic rail transit to confront its own failures, not in a courtroom, but in the unforgiving court of public opinion and regulatory oversight. I knew it would be dangerous, perhaps even illegal in some fringe ways, but the memory of Clara's blue lips and the conductor's dismissive shrug fueled my every breath. This wasn't personal anymore. It was a crusade. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. The path ahead was dark and fraught with peril, but I walked it with a quiet, unyielding determination. Act 3. Revenge, the reckoning, its execution, and the aftermath emerging from the depths of despair. I felt like a different person. The Rhiannon Hayes, who meticulously chose curtain fabrics, had been shed, replaced by a sharpened, steelier version. My grief for Clara was still a raw wound, but it no longer incapacitated me. Instead, it was a constant, cold fuel. I had embraced my role as the systemic avenger, and my principles, once gentle guides, were now rigid commandments. My meticulous research, spanning months, had revealed a critical weakness in Atlantic rail transit, a pervasive, almost cavalier, disregard for passenger well-being that trickled down from executive decisions to frontline operational procedures. They were obsessed with on-time performance metrics above all else, even at the cost of safety and service. This was their Achilles heel, and I was ready to exploit it. My plan was intricate, a mosaic of carefully chosen pieces. It wasn't about a single explosive act, but a series of precise, surgical strikes designed to expose their systemic failures in plain sight, forcing regulatory bodies and the public to react. The goal wasn't just to punish Atlantic rail transit. It was to ensure no one else suffered Clara's fate. My resourcefulness was honed to a razor's edge. I had identified 3 key vulnerabilities: their outdated booking system, their deeply flawed internal complaint resolution process, and their deceptive public relations strategy that painted a picture of efficiency and care. The first phase involved their booking system. Through months of probing, I discovered an overlooked vulnerability in their legacy passenger manifest software, a minor flaw that, if exploited correctly, could create a cascading effect of misallocated reservations. It wasn't about hacking the system to crash it. It was about subtly manipulating data, nudging it off kilter, so that thousands of seemingly legitimate bookings would, on the busiest travel day of the year, result in widespread seat duplication and confusion. Think of it: multiple passengers holding identical seat numbers, all confirmed by the system. The meticulous part was ensuring this only happened for specific types of seats, particularly those often used by vulnerable passengers or those requiring special accommodation. I wanted to highlight the chaos that would ensue when their no power to move policy was faced with an overwhelming volume of conflicting claims. I didn't need to be a master hacker. I found a way to inject tiny, almost imperceptible anomalies into their reservation database, using publicly available Wi-Fi networks near their corporate offices, and a sophisticated spoofing technique I'd learned about in a dark corner of the internet. It was slow, tedious work, executed over weeks, a few data packets at a time, each one a tiny pinprick in their armor. My hands ached, my eyes burned, but the image of Clara's strained face kept me going. The target date was meticulously chosen, the Friday before a major national holiday, known for the highest train ridership of the year. The trains would be packed beyond capacity, conductors already stressed. It was the perfect storm. Phase 2 involved their internal complaint system. Over the past year, I had submitted dozens of meticulously detailed mock complaints, using various anonymous personas, describing scenarios remarkably similar to Clara's, involving denied access to reserved spaces, indifferent staff, and medical emergencies. I also submitted reports about minor structural defects I'd observed on trains, or maintenance oversights I'd researched online. Each complaint was designed to be ignored or dismissed, and each dismissal became a damning piece of evidence of their systemic indifference. I had a digital archive, time-stamped and cross-referenced, of every one of their boilerplate non-responses. I knew exactly how long it took for a complaint to be closed without investigation, the names of the low-level employees who signed off on them, the exact canned responses they used. It was a horrifying testament to their automated apathy. Phase 3 was the public exposure. I had cultivated relationships with a few independent investigative journalists, not revealing my full identity or intentions, but feeding them anonymous tips about Atlantic Rail Transit's consistent delays, their poor safety records, and their high rate of unresolved customer complaints. I had also created a secure, anonymous online platform, populated with all the data I had painstakingly collected, spreadsheets detailing historical delays, internal memos about cost-cutting measures, and crucially, the dismissive responses to the mock complaints, all cross-referenced with public safety reports. This platform was my sword, ready to be unsheathed. The day of reckoning arrived. I watched the live train tracker from my home office, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The initial reports came in subtly. A slight delay here, a few disgruntled passengers there. But as the morning wore on, the chaos began to escalate, exactly as I had planned. The duplicated seat reservations hit dozens of trains simultaneously. Passengers, many of whom had paid for premium seats or accessible spaces, found themselves face to face with others holding the exact same ticket, the same seat number. Arguments erupted on platforms, in carriages, fueled by holiday stress and overcrowding. Conductors, overwhelmed and adhering to the no power to move policy, became helpless figures, unable to resolve the widespread confusion. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Atlantic Rail Chaos and double book trains trended nationally. People posted videos of the confrontations, the angry exchanges, the sheer disbelief on their faces. The situation spiraled out of Atlantic Rail Transit's control. Delays mounted, not just due to the initial system bug, but because of the passenger disputes holding up departures, blocking aisles, and forcing security interventions. As the media picked up the story, the journalists I had subtly primed began to publish their in-depth exposés. They cited the unprecedented system failures, but then, critically, they linked them to a pattern of systemic negligence. My anonymous online platform, the one laden with years of Atlantic Rail Transit's ignored complaints and internal data, suddenly went viral. The sheer volume of evidence, meticulously laid out, undeniable, was too overwhelming to ignore. It revealed their deliberate policy of prioritizing schedules over human need, their calculated indifference to passenger distress, and the shocking number of unaddressed safety recommendations. The public outcry was immense. Passengers who had endured countless minor grievances for years suddenly had a voice, a collective anger. Regulatory bodies, shamed by the public spotlight, announced immediate, comprehensive investigations. Atlantic Rail Transit's stock plummeted. The CEO was forced to issue a groveling apology on national television, admitting to systemic oversights and promising immediate, drastic reforms. Board members resigned, heads rolled. The culture of complacency, built on years of unchallenged power, began to crumble. I watched it all unfold from my quiet home in Charleston, a strange mix of triumph and emptiness swirling within me. Justice, in a systemic sense, had been served. The chaos I had orchestrated, born of meticulous planning and unwavering resourcefulness, had forced the behemoth to finally acknowledge its failures. No one would suffer Clara's exact fate again, at least not at the hands of Atlantic Rail Transit, without a reckoning. The consequences for me were minimal, surprisingly. My anonymity held. I had left no digital fingerprints that could be traced back, only a well-placed series of highly specific data points that looked like random system anomalies. The authorities focused on Atlantic Rail Transit's internal vulnerabilities, not on an external perpetrator. I had become a ghost in the machine, a whisper of justice in the digital wind. The house still felt quiet, but the hollow ache in my chest was replaced by a different kind of silence, one of profound, exhausted peace. I had sought justice for Clara, yes, but also for all the unseen victims, the countless individuals whose lives had been disrupted or diminished by corporate indifference. My principled nature had found its true calling, not in design, but in holding power accountable. I returned to my design work, but with a renewed sense of purpose. My meticulousness was now a tool for building, not just dismantling. I volunteered for local advocacy groups, lending my unique research skills to causes that championed accountability and fairness. I carried Clara's memory not as a burden, but as a guiding light. Her loss had been my crucible, forging me into someone stronger, someone who understood that sometimes, to change a flawed system, you had to hit it where it hurt the most, not with a fist, but with undeniable, irrefutable truth. And in that, there was a peculiar, bittersweet form of victory. As for the selfish passenger whose luggage denied Aunt Clara her space, I learned through one of the leaked internal reports that, because of the massive overhaul Atlantic Rail Transit was forced to implement, including mandatory comprehensive medical accommodation policies and severe penalties for staff who failed to enforce them, that very passenger, on a subsequent journey, found himself forcibly removed from a train for refusing to comply with new, strict regulations regarding shared passenger space, causing him to miss a connecting flight and a significant business meeting. The irony wasn't lost on me. He wasn't punished by me directly, but by the very system I forced to change. And that, in its own quiet way, was the most satisfying twist of all. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.